Hello, everyone. My name is Elijah Kinnear,
My name is Tommy Mulcairns.
and welcome to Deconstructing Politics, the only news show run by college students. In today's news, first up on the docket, we have some news out of the Israel-Palestine conflict. It seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu has dissolved his war cabinet. And essentially, with the leaving of Ben-Gvir, he has dissolved the war cabinet and seemingly is taking a central authority on the conflict happening in Gaza.
I think this was planned already. It wasn't planned, but it was very much expected as soon as Ben-Gvir dropped out, because Netanyahu has had this sort of war cabinet, and same with Israel. Israel's had a war cabinet that was seen as a show of unity ever since October 7th, where you had the centrists and the far-right Netanyahu coalition coming together to support genocide.
Oh, for sure. I mean, this is a far-right government. I mean, if you look at even Ben-Gvir, if you look up his politics, he's about as bad as the rest. So this is essentially, could you even say it's a right-wing infighting?
I don't, when have you seen centrists align with the right wing? I mean, this is really, new in history. That's never happened before.
Oh, totally. We've never seen that happen. Never happened in other countries. Germany doesn't exist.
It's almost like centrists and the right wing have something in common and that they always work together. It's crazy how that works out.
Yeah, but this is seemingly a break from one far-right party from another, and now it seems like they're infighting over the atrocities that are happening in Gaza. It's going to be very interesting how this plays out, but, I mean, we all know Netanyahu. I mean, we've talked on this show about Netanyahu's politics. He's a far-right, anti-Palestinian politician with some genocidal tendencies, so I don't think we're going to see any change from the status quo.
Wait, are you serious? I thought Netanyahu was a socialist. I thought he really cared about the people. That's crazy.
I think Marx quoted him. It's so true. But no. I think we're seeing a very big break, and we're going to be seeing throughout after this news story how that develops. But I think this is yet another centralization and authoritarian push from the Israeli government.
Well, Netanyahu's always been super far right? But even before October 7th, there was the push to basically take over the the judiciary from Netanyahu that caused widespread outbreaks even within the IDF. I guess fascism is only cool when they have a say in it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is nothing new. So we'll be developing the story in the meanwhile. But then
but before we move on, I just have some questions. Yeah, I mean, what do you think that this means for Palestine? Do you think that without this, if there was a centrist voice calming down the genocide, one, that's terrifying, two, they did not do a good job. But I mean, even now without that centrist voice, I mean, does this mean that it gets kicked up to 10, or does this mean that things are going to Netanyahu now no longer has coalition support? He could be essentially removed from government. I mean, what does this mean for Palestine going forward?
Well, I think we're going to see a continuation of the status quo. I mean, I think a lot of the parties, I mean, you can't get more right-wing than Netanyahu, but we've seen that parties that manage to be that are calling for further escalation. So I think we're just going to see the status quo, the continuation of the ongoing genocide. Essentially what this means is just Netanyahu shoring up support for himself and his party. I don't think this really changes much. I mean, when it comes to Israeli politics and the parties in Israel, you could probably swap them in and out and for each other, and there's not going to be much change. I mean, unless you put in Ben-Gvir's party, I don't think you're going to see much more escalation, but how do you escalate from genocide?
Well, I think even with Ben-Gvir's party, right? I mean, I think that the whole centrist line has always been, we need to just eradicate Hamas, which is a goal that cannot be achieved, right? Like, they're going in there for a reason that makes zero sense, is not achievable. So I think if you had Ben-Gvir's party in there, you would essentially have staying the course with Netanyahu, but I think that with Netanyahu now untethered from any sort of centrist voice, you're going to have a much, much, much more brutal genocide than the genocide that's already being conducted.
Oh, you're totally correct. I mean, we've seen that even quote-unquote centrist parties in Israel have left Netanyahu's government, these quote-unquote centrist politicians denouncing him, saying that he doesn't want the war to end, and that they've left his government. So, yeah, I think we're seeing a big shift to the right. However, I do think that, I mean, What are they offering different? Even these centrist parties agree with the war in Gaza. A lot of these parties agree with what's going on.
Sorry,
So,
quick correction. We're talking about Benny Gantz, not Ben Gvir.
oh,
Ben Gvir. It's hard to tell with all these far right fascist figures. They're all kind of the same. But
yeah, it's a little hard. You pick a genocider, any genocider.
mhm.
But yeah, I think I think it's going to be a continuation of the status quo. It's going to continuation of the war in Gaza, and we're going to just have to see how it develops. But this is definitely, I would say, this is less of an ideological shift and more of a shift to authoritarianism around his party.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's what Netanyahu's wanted for a long time.
Oh, absolutely.
I think he knew this consolidation of power was coming, and he was just biding his time.
Yeah. And that's essentially all it is. And I think for the listeners at home, this is just essentially big news. The atrocities continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree, Eli.
And then, so speaking of atrocities, meanwhile, we have in Europe, the far right continues to expand with a lot of anxiety over the future elections in Europe. And I found this article today before we did the show that weirdly in Europe, it's been young voters coming out for the far right parties like the AfD, Le Pen's party in France, and Meloni in Italy. These fascist parties, there's young voters voting for them, and there's a really good article talking about all that is about from Political, but it seems it's a lot of the younger generation's dissatisfaction with the current status quo, with the current centrist parties, and I don't blame them, but as a young person myself, yes, I do blame them.
Well, you have to wonder if, because America's youth, right, has moved to the left, I would say, of what is considered the status quo of American politics. You have to wonder if these are both reactions. Okay, you don't have to wonder. This is exactly what's happening. Both reactions to the same thing, right? Material conditions under global capitalism are getting much, much worse for young people, and I think that young people are looking ahead at their future and don't see much in store. And I think that, a lot of American youths have moved in a somewhat good direction. I think that what you're seeing in Europe is far-right parties being able to capitalize on that and turn the very real analysis of material prospects for young people towards fascism, towards anti-immigrant sentiment, towards all these terrible things. They're basically saying that instead of blaming the rich capitalists who have put you in this position, you should turn around and blame the immigrants and the people who don't have any power in society whatsoever.
I mean, yeah, you're totally correct. I mean, we've seen quick history lesson. I mean, we saw back in the 20s and 30s when it came to the rise of the fascist movement, it was this growing discontent during the Great Depression and economic downturn. And many people were looking for, the alternative voices when it came to that discontent. And some of them became socialists. So we saw the rise of socialist parties. But we also saw the rise of the fascist parties who were, unlike socialists, were able to direct that fear, direct that anger into something to blame, like immigrants, minority groups. We saw in Germany the direction of the blame went to the Jewish population. So I think when we talk about like the modern day of this rise of what we could call neo-fascism, neo from the Matrix, but neo-fascism, we could see that it comes mostly from now that population that is getting blamed is the immigrants. It's trying to drive that discontent into the immigration population. But it's really interesting, and I don't know how you feel about this, Tommy, but I feel like we're almost a little different in the American context where a lot of our generation in America isn't buying it, these anger towards immigrants and all that sort of stuff. So maybe the European context, at least reading from these articles, is a little different where a lot of our generation is very much critical of the government, very critical of Joe Biden, the centrist politics and the right-wing politics of Trump. I mean, we lived under it for 4 years, and now we're more directing that corporations. And meanwhile, in Europe, you're kind of just seeing that kind of getting a little bit funneled into the far right, into blaming immigrants.
Yeah, which is interesting because, I mean, I don't think that American youth are any better than European youth, right? They both kind of suck. But I think that, you're right. I mean, there's most definitely, I think that social media has been the biggest tool and reading through this article, what they're talking about is social media has been the biggest tool of the far right. And I think that, of course, social media is going to appeal more to young people. But then you have to wonder why social media hasn't been as effective in America as it has been in Europe. Like why is the far right in Europe been able to utilize social media in a way that the far right in America has not been able to? And you see some of it with like what's going on X and on at quote unquote Twitter. Like there's definitely a lot of far right things ever since Elon Musk took over being posted and being just allowed to flourish without any check on it whatsoever. But it hasn't taken hold the same way that it has in Europe.
Yeah, no, it's been very interesting, and I would almost say that I mean, if you look at the polls of our generation in America, it's a lot more left leaning. We've seen a resurgence of left wing groups that maybe have been dormant since the '60s, but in Europe, you're seeing a lot of the youth, these discontented young generation, falling for right wing media, both with the AfD and these other far right parties in Europe. I think social media does play a role. I mean, anyone that's listening can quick pull up Twitter and go onto any tweet and see some guy spewing conspiracy theories under an Elon Musk tweet.
It's me.
Is it you, Tommy?
Yeah,
Or are you the
it's
one doing
always
it?
me,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think I saw that. You're gonna get kicked off the show.
Not Twitter though.
Not Twitter though. But you do see this. But I think the American youth, we've lived under a right wing government for a very long time. But the European youth, they very much seem to be falling for that rhetoric because I don't know. I guess the political situation is different. They've lived under left wing governments longer than we have. And which failed to deliver, and now we have this resurgent alt-right governments in Europe that seemingly are capturing that consensus.
I mean, to be clear, I don't think that there's been a real like left-wing government. I mean, left-wing in the
Of
sense
course
of
not.
right. Like we're talking like the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. It's not necessarily what we're talking about. Like these are not communist governments. These are not socialist or Marxist influenced governments. These are far left progressive governments.
Yeah, yeah. It's been these like center left, like making reforms, like kind of like compromising on the ideals that they were stood on, but half measures that did not appeal enough, that did not do enough for the younger generation. And now we're seeing, I would almost say the world politics is kind of coming into consensus. Everywhere you see a cost of living crisis. Everywhere you see the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. The wealth is being concentrated to the top. And we're seeing, as I'm guessing the youth in the 20s and 30s saw, this reaction to it that is trying to place the blame somewhere. And I would almost ask, do you think that is on the left-wing movements in Europe? That they're losing ground to right-wing narratives and they're losing ground to these questions and blaming it on immigrants and these minority populations?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, I do think that any true left-wing movement is going to be people-led, right? Like, it's going to be a people-led movement. I just think that in a lot of these cases, I think people have been disenfranchised. In European politics especially, where Europeans are a little bit more understanding of... a little bit more understanding of politics, a little bit more engaged, whereas I think that American politics is 100% vibes-based. At least people who are engaged. I think that you see people who are just becoming disenfranchised across the board in Europe, whereas in America, I think that people are disenfranchised, but I think that they're turning that more into action. Whereas in Europe, where you have like socialist parties, but they're like allowed in the electorate. They're not necessarily like they think that the option there is to vote for the Socialist Party and that's how you would win socialism. Whereas here, I think that it's very clear that there is no socialist alternative.
Yeah, actually, I would almost say that the reason why we haven't really tracked so hard towards the right wing, we're not in the situation of Europe is, America has never had this socialist party. We've never had this kind of left-wing alternative that has turned its back on and moderated it. You and I are both on the left wing of American politics, and
What?
Are we really?
When were you going to tell me? I thought we were centrist.
Yeah, me too. We're voting Biden right now. But we both, we don't have a political home. Meanwhile, in Europe, those political homes of the left-wing movement have essentially kind of turned their back and disappointed this disenfranchised and disappointed young voting population. So I think we're a little bit more. I'd say the American young youth. We are a little more realistic about what's going on here. We know how powerless we are.
Well, Well, I think this is what happens to left-wing parties who view electoralism as the end goal rather as a means to an end. I think that electoralism can work to organize the working class, because the working class does pay attention to electoral politics. However, it is not the end goal, right? And if you're looking at that as the end goal, you're going to wind up making a lot of compromises that are not necessarily in any way socialist. You're going to wind up being brought towards the center, and that is going to kind of gut you of any revolutionary teeth that you had originally.
Oh, fully agreed. I mean, when it comes to, I feel like that's another aspect of like our younger generation. I mean, anyone can go on TikTok and see just how many people are disappointed about the upcoming election with Joe Biden and Donald Trump and this supposed rematch we're going to be facing. I think a lot of us are very realistic that electoral politics are not the way. They're not going to be the solving factor. And I think a lot of the reason why we've been, at least in our generation, have been able to resist this rightward shift that maybe Europe is not resisting quite as hard is that, you know, we have it so blatant. I mean, the capitalist, you know, this like right-wing force in America is so blatant, so in our face, so dominating in a way that I don't think it's as obvious in Europe.
No, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, speaking of the American left-wing movement, I think it's time we bring in our guest. Adari, do you want to introduce yourself? Let's see if your mic is working. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, my name is Audari Tamayo. I'm the co-chair of the UW Milwaukee Students for Democratic Society. Happy to be here.
So your SDS is very involved, Students for Democratic Society, SDS, is very involved with the RNC, right, the march on the Republican National Convention. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you guys are marching on the convention, what's going on, how you guys are hoping to oppose what in Europe would be called the rising tide of fascism, what should be called here the rising tide of fascism with the Republican Party?
Yeah, no, we are, a proud member of the coalition to march on the RNC. We've been a part of the coalition since its inception when we found out that the Republicans were going to come, make a circus of the city. National Students for Democratic Society has endorsed the coalition to march on the RNC as well as virtually every other chapter. So we're definitely hoping to bring not just SDSers but people across the student movement here to Milwaukee. These mass mobilizations are a physical manifestation of where the youth are at, where the students are at, and ultimately we know that the real change happens in the streets. The RNC is just just a few days, but the real goal and the real purpose is maintaining that people power beyond this convention. We're marching on the RNC because, to put it simply, it's the right thing to do. We're rejecting their reactionary and racist agenda. They're at the leading front of, attacks on women, attacks on LGBTQ folks, attacks on reproductive rights, attacks on immigrants, attacks on black and brown people. They're at the leading they're the ones leading these efforts across the country. Sure, the Democrats have a role to play there, but I think we can agree that the Republicans are at the head of this reactionary movement in this country, this racist movement, this far right movement, as you characterized it. And I do think the veil is lifting. The two parties. Every day it becomes more clear that they work in tandem when it serves their purpose, and their purpose is imperialism. They're voting on in tandem to increase weapons to Israel. Biden just virtually slashed any pathway to asylum for those waiting at the border. There's still kids in borders, just like there was under Trump. With that, we're going to march on the Democrats in Chicago the following month.
So, I mean, you kind of touched on it there, but I'm curious, what do you make of the liberal argument that, yes, you're absolutely right, like Republicans pose a threat to LGBTQ people, to brown folks, to especially like if Trump got into office, the genocide in Gaza would be so much worse. I mean, what do you make of the argument that, like, well, then that's why you need to vote for Biden because it's so much more important? Like, basically the lesser of two evils argument, right? Like, there is no, the best way to stop them is to vote for Joe Biden. Do you buy that? What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can understand where some of those folks come from. You know, folks on the immigrant rights movement. I think their enemy is very clear. You know, I don't think it's on us to tell any particular sector of these movements who to vote for, who to not vote for. But I do think it's very clear that these are the two parties of the two ruling class parties. There's not really you can't get much more evil than a genocide. A genocide's a genocide.
Brave take.
So yeah, I think the facts are simple, but ultimately it's not on us to tell people who to vote for, who to not vote for. I think it's on us to get people on the streets and get people to see these things for themselves.
I mean, just personally, do you plan to vote for Biden? Do you see any merit to that argument, or were you turned off by his response to the student encampments, which I know SDS and you specifically were heavily involved with, and his response to the genocide, which has just been to do it harder?
Yeah, I think I'd much rather vote for anybody in this room than any of the purported candidates that are being imposed onto us. Biden has done nothing to help the general public. Trump will do much less. So it's I think we're forced to make a decision of whether we want to be hung hang by a high tree with the Republicans or a low tree with the Democrats. I think that's the decision we're forced to make.
Absolutely. So say you'd be willing to vote for anyone in this room. Do I have your guarantee that you're going to write me in for presidential candidate?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a bunch of people in at the primaries not too long ago. I voted uninstructed. I voted about, I wrote everything else in.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So you did, we were talking about the encampments and Joe Biden's position on genocide. You were very involved, obviously, with the UWM Coalition for Pali. I think that's the Instagram handle, UWM for Pali. UWM for Pali. Yep. So you're super involved with that. Is there any connection between the Palestinian coalitions, like the Wisconsin for Palestinian Coalition and the UWM for Pali Coalition? Are they in any way tied into the RNC? Do you see this as part of what's going on with the march in the RNC?
No, 100%. I think it was just a training ground for the police forces. It was a training ground for the city to really see how they react to mass mobilization. I think beyond that, the student groups involved at the encampment are largely involved in the Coalition of March on the RNC. The Coalition of March on the RNC, like I said, it has a demand to defend women's and reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights, to reject the racist and reactionary Republican agenda, to stand with Palestine, to expand immigrants' rights and peace, equity, and justice for all. So anybody that believes in these things is, a part of the coalition. Welcome to be part of the coalition. I think the students that were involved at the encampment, not just the active participants, but those that witnessed what the encampment accomplished. Aside from the demands and bringing the community together, and showing what a people's movement can look like and will look like and is beginning to look like. I think that scares Republicans and Democrats alike. Milwaukee is a fairly blue city, and it opens its doors for the Republicans to do whatever they want. The Republicans are coming onto our campus soon enough. Their security apparatus is going to stay in, some dorms. They open the doors for them while they, force people off campus. They call us terrorist sympathizers, but the real terrorist sympathizers are being invited in.
So, yeah, I mean, would it be correct to characterize your position as these struggles are interrelated, right? Like, what the March in the RNC and the Coalition Against Palestine, these are all mass movements that are standing against essentially similar, if not the same, enemy?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
I was reading about that. They're going to be staying in the Sandberg dorms, so they're going to be staying on student housing. These interns and these people that are going to be working at the RNC. And on top of that, they're going to be catering downtown the entire time. So Milwaukee has completely opened its arms. I mean, we saw a statement from the mayor basically saying, trashing on Trump after he trashed on us. But yet we're still going to be catering for him. Our business is going to be catering for him. We're going to be using student housing to house these people that are going to be running the RNC. It's absolutely insane. I would almost say that like it's ridiculous that the Democrats and these like liberal forces in Milwaukee are just basically standing aside for this fascist right wing convention.
So, Adari, what's next for the UWM for Pally Coalition, right? Because we saw you guys after the encampment. There was a meeting with Foundation. Any updates on that? And also, there was the protest against the Board of Regents. I mean, what comes next for the UWM for Pally Coalition? Is there any plan next, or have things kind of calmed down after the encampment?
Yeah, I think the pressure is still there. People are still mobilizing. Soon after that, the encampment ended. A few days after that was Nakba Day, and we mobilized, close to 300, 400 people right outside of the UW Milwaukee Foundation's office. So I think it's clear who the target is. After that meeting, nothing came from it. They couldn't even get another meeting out of it. I think they gave us that meeting just to check a box off of their list. So we need to keep them to their word. This genocide has not slowed down whatsoever. So neither should we. We had that mobilization with hundreds of people. We went into the Board of Regents meeting a couple weeks ago now to put divestment on the agenda. There was a presentation being led by UW Milwaukee talking about transforming for tomorrow together, with no mention of divestment, no mention of even the most basic of what you can call liberal reforms, ethical investments. They're not talking about any of these things, but they want to talk about transforming for tomorrow together. Plain and simple, that's not right. We disrupted that. They treated us as they do. Dragged some of our folks out. Didn't even let them speak for more than 45 seconds. So I think the students, the youth in Milwaukee, across Wisconsin, folks from Madison, Green Bay, we're coordinating across the state to do something. So I think the Board of Regents, the UW. The UW system as a whole, they feel us as a thorn on their side. I think as time progresses, we're gonna target the statewide law, anti-constitutional law, saying that we can't boycott Israel. But ultimately, until then, we're gonna keep that pressure up. If that means we have to meet them at their house, we'll meet them at their house. If that means we're gonna disrupt another meeting, we'll disrupt another meeting. That means we gotta, be right outside of the UWM Foundation office until they actually meet with us and do something about these righteous demands. And that's what we're gonna do.
Absolutely. I mean, do you get the sense that, and we have a minute left here, so we're gonna try and wrap up really quick. But do you get the sense that UWM is trying to crack down harder on protesters, especially the pro-Palestinian protesters, especially given what they did at the Board of Regents meeting?
Yeah, I think they're trying to make a point. They're trying to make an example out of us. They got a lot of flack because they didn't send in the riot police on us during the encampment. I think they're trying to appease those reactionary forces even more so now. But it's clear that they can give us a citation. They can even arrest us. They can give us some bruises. Give us some sore bodies. It's nothing new. It's nothing new for the student movement. It's nothing new for anybody that's been fighting for freedom, been fighting for justice. We're used to this type of thing, unfortunately, and we'll take that and more if it means that we get to see a more just society for all.